Hey everybody, this is King Kong 9200, and today we will be going over what makes the MonsterVerse graphic novel, Kingdom Kong, so special. Now, Kingdom Kong takes place after the events of Godzilla King of the Monsters, and surprisingly it does a lot of very interesting things with King Kong as a character, and with the pacing of future MonsterVerse stories. There are also a ton of other ideas and elements that I really enjoyed about this story, same with Godzilla Dominion, so let's just delve right into it. So in real-world time, Kingdom Kong takes place during the GVK era of MonsterVerse media. So this would include Kingdom Kong, Godzilla Dominion, and of course the film Godzilla vs. Kong. Now this era ushered in new stories where monsters basically take much more precedence over the human stories and characters. So by the point the MonsterVerse has been around for nearly a decade. Up to this point we've had 2014, Awakening, Skull Island, Birth of Kong, Aftershock, and King of the Monsters, all over the course of around 6 years. What separates these MonsterVerse films and stories to those of the GVK era is the balance between human and monster. These stories have all seemed to share humans having more on-screen time and presence over the monsters. And one of the reasons this is a problem is because the humans aren't all that particularly interesting or well written in the MonsterVerse. They're pretty stale throughout the series, which only makes us want to see the monsters more. But another issue is that the monsters themselves also feel uninteresting and bland. I hate to say it, but I think one of the reasons this would be because they don't seem to have enough screen time to be fleshed out as characters. Monsters can be very interesting as characters, as films like King Kong 2005 have shown that this is possible to do. And there's a ton of other kaiju media out there that shows this as well. But it just feels like, pre-GVK MonsterVerse media didn't really take advantage of this kind of storytelling where the monster and human screen time is much more balanced, despite monsters being the reasons audiences are there to begin with. Kingdom Kong helps with the transition and exploring a kaiju like Kong as if he were a legitimate character, giving him more time on screen, or page, I guess you can say. Now, while the pre-GVK era MonsterVerse films take the approach of showing the monsters less, what GVK did was show the monsters like Kong more in order to humanize him. It gives audiences the time they need to really connect with the monster and feel for them or sympathize with them. And again, a great example of this would be King Kong 2005, which did this very well with Kong himself. Audiences have spent enough time with him on screen to connect with him on an emotional level, which is why his death was a lot more gut-wrenching and sorrowful. Now, narratively, this can be a lot harder to do with different monsters, especially much larger ones like Godzilla, and even characteristically it'd be quite a difficult challenge to pull off. I mean, imagine seeing a 400-foot Godzilla playing around with humans, or being in the same frame as them without them getting squashed or dying of radioactivity. It's hard to do. And this is the thing monster movies always have seemed to struggle with the most, ever since the kaiju genre was created. Finding the right balance between monster and human screen time, while also trying to make sure that each one correlates to the other. What I mean by that is you can't just go from like a human scene to a random scene of a monster just chilling, then back to the humans, because that would that would halt the momentum of the film or story. What Kingdom Kong does so brilliantly is that it manages this mix between human story and monster story in a very narratively fitting way. The story seems to strike a balance that is very hard to come by in this genre. This novel seems to help aid in the transitionary period of more human, less monster to more monster, less human, which is perfect considering how imbalanced that dynamic was throughout the series so far. So they're much more on equal footing as opposed to monsters simply having more screen time as humans or vice versa. And I'd like to just clarify one thing. I'm glad the MonsterVerse didn't just jump into monster action like immediately, but I do think we should have had a bit more monster action in G14, yet generally keep it more human, less monster. By Kong Skull Island, we ease a little more into that monster territory, of course, considering the circumstances of being on, Skull Island. Then by King of the Monsters, we should have struck that healthy balance between monster and human. But in doing so, there would have had to have been a good story for the character of Godzilla, and I can see why that, would have been incredibly hard to do. Now, I don't feel like that was the case with the actual film. I didn't think we got nearly enough time with Godzilla in that movie, but the reason I say this is because it would have helped with the transition to GVK, where now a monster like Kong is getting a lot of screen time and is being treated as a legitimate character, as opposed to being a background omnipotent being who's used to drive the plot forward like he and Godzilla were before this film. So one of the reasons this story is so special is because it helps provide the transition to a more balanced human/monster story. As the readers, we get to spend more time with Kong as he lives his days on this lonely island he's just too big for. While I personally wouldn't have gone this route, it makes narrative sense as to why they're going with the Kong is too big for Skull Island route, as it's meant to set up the Hollow Earth being his new home storyline we get in GVK. But we get to garner more sympathy with Kong's character as he's still fighting monsters, and when he ends up accidentally killing innocent creatures, it really does take a toll on him emotionally. I mean, he feels bad for killing a scurr buffalo, which makes the audience feel bad for Kong because this isn't the life he asked for it. We also spend time with Kong, and it becomes apparent that the loneliness is really catching up with him, and he's driven to discover what happened to his species and why he is where he is today. In this case, 2021. It helps add to the anger Kong is going to feel against Godzilla when he sees that Godzilla's species is part of the reason why his is no longer around today. We also get the badass monster fight, which is actually one of my personal favorites in any piece of media. But all this narrative time we're spending with Kong not only gives us a lot more of that monster action we've desired for so long before the GVK era of the Monsterverse, but we're also building much more of a connection to the character of Kong. If you look at Kong's character before the GVK era, you can see they didn't really utilize his character all that much. We didn't get nearly as much screen time with him as he did with the Kong of 2005, and audiences connected to that Kong more as opposed to this Monsterverse Kong. In the comic series Skull Island: The Birth of Kong, Kong is hidden pretty much throughout the entire series up until the very end, and before that we're only met with flashbacks to Kong as a baby, so we didn't really have that much of a connection to him up until GVK. And by then, he feels like an entirely new character because he basically is. So this story definitely aided in giving us that development the character so desperately needed, while also reinventing the formula and giving us more time with him as the Monsterverse desperately needed as well. Kingdom Kong breathes new life into the King Kong mythos. It does an excellent job at introducing new monsters like Camazotz, adding to his species' past, improving the design of Kong, and doing new inventive things with Skull Island. Now, earlier I said there were things with Kong I wouldn't do, such as the Hollow Earth, and personally, I would have kept Kong to Skull Island and just shown it's his own thing, with Titans roaming around larger parts of the terrain. But the Monsterverse went with the Hollow Earth route for Kong, which I can completely live with, I understand. It's just one of those small personal things that you would do differently, But there is indeed creativity going on into it, that you can acknowledge. And they're doing different things with Skull Island, which we have not seen for the longest time. Regarding Kong's mythos, it's worth mentioning that King Kong has a sequel problem. I don't know if many of you have noticed when looking at King Kong sequels, but they're always kinda terrible. They're typically below average, or they just don't have as much entertainment value or impact as the predecessor films usually do. Now, it is definitely possible to make a great sequel to a King Kong film, especially when you reinvent him as a kaiju, but you'd need good writers and storytellers to do it. Nothing is impossible. When the Monsterverse introduced Kong, it'd taken up a very serious challenge, which was to move Kong past his roots. The great thing is that, again, there are new stories that can be told. We've even seen it done before. Kong Skull Island had the safety net of still somewhat being an origin story for this new incarnation of Kong, while also being different from the original Kong stories. The real challenge is the sequel. I'm not referring to his next on-screen appearance like GVK, but I'm talking about a brand new standalone King Kong story. GVK definitely continues the Kong story and all, but it isn't purely a Kong story. You got Godzilla in the mix, and both characters are propelling each other's storylines, which is great. That's not a bad thing at all. It just isn't a standalone Kong story. After Kong Skull Island, we got Skull Island: The Birth of Kong, which also, it isn't so much as a sequel to Kong Skull Island as Kingdom Kong is. To be honest, Kong, again, he was mainly in the background, like I said. We only really get that flashback to him as a kid and the fall of his species. And when we did see Kong, it was at the very end, only for a few pages, and he fought some small-ass spiders. So, very little time with the big guy, even after Kong Skull Island, which also, in and of itself, seemed to lack enough screen time to Kong. Kingdom Kong is what helped in reintroducing the character and reinventing the mythos. What I personally especially love about this story is the introduction of Camazotz. I'm just sorry, you all know how much I love Camazotz. If you guys are fans of my earlier videos, I did a lot of Mechagodzilla and Camazotz speculation videos, and you know how much I love that monster. And dude, this monster is so badass. It's just one of my all-time favorite monsters. Excellent design, very cool aesthetic. I love it so much. We've had giant bat monsters go up against Kong in the past before, but this specific kaiju makes for an excellent adversary for Kong. I mean, Camazotz is able to fly, he uses his tail as a weapon, he has a screech attack. It's got all these abilities that seem to complement Kong's own abilities so well. The design is incredible. Did I mention how astonishing the design is? Camazotz is a Stormbringer as well, which means that, if they were to battle, they would be engulfed within a storm. With purple lightning flashing around and an overall apocalyptic dark purple color palette, it just complements Kong so well. I wasn't a fan of the storms we saw in King of the Monsters. I don't think visually they looked all that nice, but it seems like in this art style, they pulled it off very well. So Camazotz holds a different kind of threat to the world. The motivations of the monster makes perfect sense, as does the reason it awakens, which, if you don't know, would be due to the humans drilling in order to get to the vortex that opens before the island collapses. Camazotz is terrifyingly illustrated, and so it's just this incredibly unique monster that I really think is underrated, and it makes for an excellent villain to Kong. So yeah, this novel is full of very, very amazing additions to King Kong's mythos. Kingdom Kong also has some very beautifully written characters. I touched on it earlier, but I personally really enjoyed the characters in this story. We get to see a fully fledged Kaiju Kong that has improved character development from previous Monsterverse stories, as well as human characters that, to me, are absolutely a step up from what we have seen in most Monsterverse media before or since. I'll start with King Kong himself. Regarding Kong being a full-on kaiju, it's like I said beforehand, we get to truly explore Kong's loneliness on the island he's simply too big for. Now, one thing I noticed was that Kong outgrowing his island could be symbolic. It could be taken as a metaphor as him truly outgrowing his original tragic story and his sequel problem he's had over the years. Kong continues to discover more about his ancestry in the story, and what's particularly interesting and very fascinating in the story is seeing his reaction to everything. Kong enters this massive temple, and right before he's about to uncover this hieroglyphic that shows an ancient Kong and Godzilla battling, he closes his eyes, and he's interrupted by the detonations to enter the vortex and Camazotz's awakening. But this moment of hesitation shows Kong has been holding on to so much of this pain and this anger and sadness he doesn't want to have anymore. And what he's about to uncover might be the fuel that completely rejuvenates those emotions for potentially an entire lifetime. And it's one of those things that seem to subconsciously add to Kong's character and how we feel about him. The main human character is named Audrey Burns, and she's a jet pilot. She initially encountered Camazotz in 2019 and nearly lost somebody she loves named Tam. Now, as Audrey's put on this Skull Island mission due to her skill, we get to see her deal with the trauma she sustained of, to her, failing with Camazotz, who sent Tam into a coma. Now, Audrey is a very determined and stubborn person at times, and this is what nearly gets Tam killed. This haunts Audrey throughout the entire story. She constantly has flashbacks and reminders to her failing of being there for Tam, and how her deciding to dive straight into battle without following protocol is what doomed her entire fleet. Now, she begins to mess up in training, and at the height of her not believing in herself, Audrey comes to find that she isn't as alone as she thinks. The events of King of the Monsters are brought into things as Audrey's teammates begin to explain that they understand her pain. They've all lost people they've loved. They're all there for a reason, and they're all looking for redemption as well. And as teammates, they have each other's backs. It's such a beautifully touching scene, and it helps in capping off Audrey's story and her going through her trauma. Audrey steps up in the end, rematching Camazotz and his army, whilst also going about helping Kong in his fight. Audrey helps Kong, which results in him catching her in the air and saving her, coming face to face with each other. It's almost therapeutic for her, I see it as an awakening. Audrey was incredibly alone throughout the story, as was Kong, and the moral support her teammates provided for her is now what Audrey is providing for Kong. It's almost as if Audrey is looking at a reflection of herself and who she used to be. With Audrey now having the moral support and compassion of her teammates, as well as getting the closure to aid in Camazotz's defeat, she's almost completely past her trauma. Almost. But there's still one more thing that she needs to do. We see earlier on that Audrey feels such tremendous amounts of guilt for believing she failed Tam that she never visits Tam in the hospital because Tam is in a coma. It's almost as if she was punishing herself and everybody around her because she felt like a failure. By the end of the story, when she comes around to realizing she isn't those things she initially believed, she goes to the hospital to visit Tam. Practicing what she's going to say, she knocks on the door, only to be met with the voice of Tam, newly awakened from her coma, telling her to come in. It's a beautiful ending to a beautifully written character arc. It just shows, like, Tam holds no resentment for Audrey. It shows that it was all in Audrey's head, which is a brilliant reflection of the things we feel throughout our lives. It shows that there will always be people there to love you and push you through hard times, and be there to catch you when you fall. That even when you make mistakes, that's what makes you human. And those who love you will forgive you when you make those mistakes. They'll guide you. That is what I just love about this character. There are other characters like Houston Brooks who gets more development as well, and they're also pretty well done. I mean, I won't touch on the others as much as I did with Audrey, but I like that this doesn't feel like a bloated story with too many characters to remember or count. Audrey's fleet is very well written. They don't matter too much in the final story, but they really don't need to be, as the focus is mainly set on Audrey, Houston, and Kong. So yeah, I really enjoyed the human characters in this story. They all have great motivations and dialogue, and Audrey especially is one of my favorite characters in all of Kong media, or even kaiju media for that matter. And that's really saying something, because the bar was set so high with films like King Kong 2005 and a lot of other Godzilla movies. I mean, I truly hope that we get to see more characters written like this in the future, because this is what makes good characters, this kind of development. If you have human characters with as much emotional development as Audrey Burns, then you've got the keys to the kingdom right there. Greatly written characters are an incredibly important thing to have in a film or story. With characters that you can emotionally be attached to, it heightens the stakes of your story. With great human characters and great monster characters, both seeming to have a very nice balance of screen time, aiding in your investment in them all, you have an excellent story. So that is the way that these MonsterVerse movies can become much better, and the quality I hope to see these films achieve in the future. And that is all I have to say. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please leave a comment letting me know what you guys think about Kingdom Kong. If you agree with my points, if you have anything to add, I'd love to hear it. I'd also like to mention that I've still been working on animations. Right now I'm finishing up client work for a very special video you'll all be seeing soon on another amazing Godzilla channel. The next big animated project is going to be called Godzilla vs. Kong: The Hollow Earth Battle. I've got details about it on my latest community posts. It'll be multiple parts and meant to be plopped in between rounds 2 and 3 in GVK. I have an excellent team, all especially thanks to my good friend and fellow animator Mr., whose channel you can find in the description below. He's really helping to push this thing out and produce it, so major shout out to him. It'll be a really cool fight animation, basically a representation of how I would have wanted to personally see Kong, as he'd be much more equal to Godzilla. It'll be very brutal and creative, honestly. And it won't be one-sided in the slightest either. If you're worried that I'd make Kong just wipe Godzilla or Godzilla wipe Kong, don't worry, that's not gonna happen. It's gonna be so much fun and just a great time for us creators and for you fans. Aside from schoolwork and personal things in life, I'm still writing and coming up with ideas, so thanks a lot for sticking with me throughout this process. What makes Godzilla Dominion so special is coming very soon, so keep your eyes peeled. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more, and I will see you all soon. I love you all. Bye-bye.